You know, before we go anywhere tonight, I just want to say something to you. We care about you here. Genuinely. Whoever you are, whatever's happened lately, you matter in ways you might not always feel, but that doesn't make it any less true. And I hope, quietly, without rushing, that you know you're welcome here. You're safe here. This story will take its time. Before we begin, tell us if you like, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it there? Now, if you've got something warm to drink, hold it close. Let's start. It began on a Thursday night that didn't seem all that different from the others, except for the fact that the stars, one by one, had simply stopped showing up. No flash, no noise, just gone. Summer noticed first. She had been leaning on the windowsill in her room, waiting for the sound of Rick moving around downstairs, tinkering with something that would almost certainly end up in some other dimension by morning. But instead the night was hushed, like the house had taken a slow, deep breath and was holding it. She looked up again, eyes adjusting to the thin glow from the street lamp. Above her, the sky had turned into an enormous sheet of black velvet without a single pinprick of light. It wasn't cloud cover. She could see the edges of the moon's pale curve. But the stars were gone. It was strangely unsettling, but not in the way horror feels. It was more like a memory trying to escape her mind, and the more she reached for it, the more it slipped away. Somewhere in the house, Morty was watching TV too loud. Beth was on the phone in the kitchen, her voice low and distracted. Jerry was, predictably, narrating his own search for a snack. Summer stood there alone in the soft dark, the glass beneath her fingertips cool, her reflection faint and ghost-like. She thought about waking Rick if he was even asleep, but hesitated. Sometimes he could be gentle about her curiosity. Other times, not so much. She noticed the way the night air pressed against the house, almost like it was listening. And in that listening, she felt herself drawn closer to the edge of something. Not danger, not safety, just something. Something waiting. So she whispered, almost to herself, "Where did you go?" And didn't know whether she meant the stars or someone else entirely. When Summer was little, she used to think the house itself was slightly tilted. Not enough to make you lose your balance, just enough to make the hours slip strangely, so that sometimes it was afternoon forever, and other times whole mornings seemed to vanish between blinks. It might have been Rick's fault. He'd been in the garage since before she was born, turning parts of the place into quiet pockets where time wasn't quite sure how to behave. She remembered faintly stepping into the hallway one summer evening to find the sunlight still streaming in through the kitchen window. Except it was 2 in the morning. Beth had been asleep on the couch, Morty had been curled up in a blanket, and Rick had been at the table, hunched over something small and glowing, a cup of cold coffee beside him. He'd looked up, saw her standing there in pajamas, and didn't send her back to bed. Instead, he gestured toward a chair and said, "Some things just don't run on the same clock as the rest of us." At the time, she hadn't understood. She was 6. The words didn't need to make sense. Just the way his voice softened when he said them stayed with her. That's how it was, growing up in that house. Afternoons could stretch like warm taffy. Winters could blink past in a handful of days. Birthdays sometimes came early, sometimes late. The only constant was the faint smell of solder and engine grease drifting from the garage, like a reminder that Rick was always somewhere near, bending the world at its edges. And with time leaning sideways, Summer learned something without anyone telling her. The important moments don't wait for the right time. They just arrive, quiet and unannounced, and you either notice them or you don't. That night, the night the stars forgot to appear, felt like one of those moments. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she could feel it. The way you feel the weather changing, even before the sky shows it. Somewhere below, Rick's boots scuffed faintly against the kitchen floor. The old refrigerator hummed. Time tilted again. And Summer wondered if maybe the stars weren't gone at all. Just caught, like her house sometimes was, in a place where the hours folded in on themselves and waited to be let out. The next afternoon was heavy with stillness, like the air had been poured into the house and left to settle. Morty was out with Rick, probably on some errand that would turn into a sidetrack in another galaxy, and Beth had gone to work early. Jerry was in the living room, attempting a puzzle with all the determination of a man who'd already lost. Summer was passing by the garage on her way to grab something from the laundry room when she noticed it, a door she had never seen before, standing flush against the far wall. It wasn't Rick's usual style, no whirring gears or blinking lights, no warning signs in alien script. Just a plain white door with a small round handle, like it belonged in some quiet hallway of a house she'd never been in. For a moment she stood still, listening. The garage smelled faintly of warm metal and something sweet, like rain just after it falls on dry pavement. The rest of the room was exactly as messy as usual, workbenches littered with tools, jars of unlabeled powders, coils of wire hanging like vines. But the door was new. She would have sworn on every half-forgotten memory she had that it hadn't been there yesterday. Summer's first instinct was to knock, though she didn't expect an answer. The sound was soft, muffled, almost absorbed by whatever lay on the other side. No reply. Her fingers rested on the handle, cool and smooth beneath her skin. When she opened it, there was no rush of cold air, no blast of light. Just a hallway, long and narrow, stretching into a gentle haze. The floorboards beneath her feet looked old, but they didn't creak. The walls were lined with picture frames, though the images inside them weren't photographs, just swirls of color, as if someone had tried to capture a thought halfway through remembering it. It didn't feel dangerous, it didn't even feel particularly strange, given the usual standard of her family's life. It felt quiet, like walking into a dream halfway through and not being sure if it's yours. She took a few slow steps. The air here was warmer, carrying a faint hum, like a distant voice she couldn't quite make out. She thought about calling out, but her own voice seemed too sharp for a place like this. Instead, she just kept walking, letting her fingertips trail along the walls. Somewhere far ahead, through the haze, there was the suggestion of another doorway, open, spilling a faint, silver glow across the floor. Summer didn't know why, but she smiled. Not with excitement. More like the way you smile when you see an old friend you haven't spoken to in years, and you're not sure if they'll recognize you. The silver glow drew her forward in slow, measured steps, the way you might walk toward a campfire you're not sure you were invited to. The hallway seemed longer than it had any right to be, like it was stretching to give her time to think, to decide. When she finally reached the doorway, she paused at the threshold. Inside was a small round room, lit not by lamps but by light, spilling gently through tall windows. The light didn't seem to come from outside. It shimmered faintly, as if woven from threads of moonlight. At the center of the room sat a low table. On one side of it, in a wooden chair that looked older than planets, was a woman. Her hair was the pale grey of distant fog, and her hands moved with the slow grace of someone who has been pouring tea for a very long time. She looked up when Summer entered. There was no surprise in her face, only the kind of calm that suggested she had been expecting this moment, maybe for years. "You took your time," the woman said softly, and her voice had the texture of falling rain. Summer opened her mouth to ask how she knew her, but instead the question that came out was, "What kind of tea is that?" The woman's eyes creased in a smile. "Cloud tea, from storms that never broke. It's sweet, but it leaves a little ache, the way the sky does after lightning." She gestured to the seat opposite her. "Sit." The chair was warm when Summer lowered herself into it, as if someone had just left. The tea was poured into 2 small cups, steam curling upward in delicate shapes that almost looked like faces. Summer held hers carefully, the porcelain thin enough to feel the heat seep through. They drank in silence at first. The tea tasted strange but comforting, like it had been made from something she half remembered from childhood. With each sip, a calmness settled deeper into her chest. "You've noticed the missing stars," the woman said after a while, more statement than question. Summer nodded. "Do you know why?" The woman didn't answer right away. She tilted her head toward the windows, where the light trembled like water. "Some things go missing because they're lost. Other things because they're waiting to be found." She looked back at Summer with eyes that seemed to see far more than the room they were in. "It matters which one this is." Summer didn't know what to say to that, so she let the words sit between them like the last warmth from a fading fire. The woman poured more tea, humming quietly, a tune that caught at the edges of Summer's memory. She didn't recognize it, but it felt like something she might have once fallen asleep to. The tea was nearly gone, the steam fading into the dim silver light. The woman had stopped humming, though the echo of the melody still seemed to breathe faintly in the room, like it was stitched into the air. She reached into the folds of her robe and drew out a small object, holding it in her palm. "This," she said, "is for you." It was a pocket watch, but unlike any Summer had seen before. The case was smooth and warm, made of a metal that shifted in color, sometimes pale gold, sometimes soft gray, sometimes something in between. There was no chain, no latch, no hinge. When Summer turned it over in her hand, the back felt almost alive, faintly pulsing, like the heartbeat of something small and patient. She tried to open it, but there was no seam. "It doesn't tell time?" she asked. The woman shook her head gently. "It tells you. It keeps the moments you might forget, the ones too soft to survive without a place to rest. You won't decide which ones it holds, it will choose for you." Summer looked down at the watch again. "And what happens when it's full?" The woman smiled, but it was the kind of smile that carried more weight than comfort. "Then you give it away." The watch felt heavier in Summer's palm now, though not unpleasantly so. She could imagine carrying it in her pocket, its faint heartbeat tapping in time with her own. She wanted to ask why her, why now, but the words didn't seem necessary. In this room, with its moon-thread light and its quiet tea, it felt like the answer had already been given, in a language she didn't speak, but could still somehow understand. The woman poured a final cup of tea for herself, none for Summer. "When you leave," she said softly, "don't look back. Not until you've forgotten the shape of this door." Summer didn't know if she was ready to leave, but she felt the shift in the air, the way the moment had closed around, itself like the last note of a lullaby. She stood, slipping the watch into her pocket. The woman looked at her with eyes that seemed older than the sky. "Take care of what you carry, and remember, some things go missing because they're waiting for you." When Summer stepped back into the hallway, the haze had thickened. The silver light behind her dimmed until it was only the memory of light. And then even that was gone. The door closed with a sound no louder than a breath. The next morning began the way most mornings did in that house. Quiet at first, then slowly filling with the scattered noises of everyone waking up and falling into their own small orbits. Summer was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, rolling the pocket watch in her palm like a stone you can't quite stop touching. She hadn't told anyone about it yet. It didn't feel like the kind of thing you explained. It felt more like something you kept close until it decided to speak for itself. Rick came in first, muttering about some half-baked quantum nonsense as he rummaged for coffee. Morty followed, looking a little dazed, like maybe they'd been somewhere already that morning and he wasn't fully back yet. "Hey," Summer said. He blinked at her, then frowned slightly. Sorry, what's your name again?" It was a joke, she thought at first, some clumsy attempt at being funny, but Morty's face didn't change. He really didn't know. His brow furrowed deeper, like the answer was right on the edge of his mind, but kept slipping away. "Morty, it's me," she said, trying to keep her voice even. "Your sister." He hesitated, searching her face, and then shrugged. I guess, if you say so." He grabbed a bowl and poured cereal like nothing had happened. Rick didn't look up from his coffee. "Temporary side effect," he muttered. "He got exposed to a thought leak. Names and faces go first. He'll reset in a day or two." Summer wanted to be angry at Rick, but the feeling didn't quite form. Instead, there was this quiet, hollow ache. Morty sat 2 feet away chewing, eyes sliding past her like she was just another background detail in the room. She could have been a stranger who'd wandered in. The pocket watch felt heavier in her hand. She wondered if it had taken this moment already, tucking it away somewhere safe, or if this was the kind of thing it would let fade. She didn't know which she wanted more. When she got up to leave, Morty didn't notice. He didn't look up, didn't say goodbye. She stepped into the hallway, the sound of the cereal spoon fading behind her, and it felt like she'd just walked out of her own life for a second. Later in her room, she sat on the bed with the watch in her lap and whispered her own name into the quiet, just to hear it, just to make sure it was still hers. Morning came slow, dripping into the house like honey through a thin glass jar. The air was pale with winter. Light, the kind that doesn't so much shine as it rests on everything, quiet and even. Summer didn't want to go downstairs, not because she was angry, she wasn't sure she even had the energy for that, but because she wasn't sure what Morty's eyes would do when they landed on her. Would they spark with recognition again, or would they skim past her like yesterday, leaving her to feel like she was standing on the wrong side of a window? Still, the smell of something warm drifted up the stairs, and her feet followed without asking her permission. Rick was at the stove. No lab coat today, just a shirt and that same hunched posture, as if his spine carried more years than the rest of him admitted to. He didn't turn when she entered, just nudged a plate toward the far end of the counter. Scrambled eggs, toast, and a few slices of something that looked like bacon but shimmered faintly around the edges, like it wasn't fully in this dimension. She sat. The chair felt cold through her pajamas. Rick poured coffee into a chipped mug, took a sip, and leaned against the counter across from her. They didn't talk, they didn't need to. She caught his eyes for a moment, just long enough to see something there that didn't make it to his mouth. It wasn't pity, it wasn't apology, it was more like acknowledgement. Like he'd been here himself once, in some other kitchen, with some other person he couldn't quite reach anymore. The eggs were good, the toast was warm, Rick's coffee smelled like it could strip paint, but the steam carried a comfort she didn't expect. When she finished, he took the plate without a word, rinsed it in the sink, and went back to the stove to tend to his own. As she stood to leave, he said without looking up, "He'll remember by tonight." His voice was flat, but there was a thread under it, thin as fishing line, easy to miss, holding something fragile. Summer nodded, even though his back was turned, and went upstairs. In her pocket, the watch pulsed once, faintly, like a heartbeat she was carrying for someone else. By evening, Morty remembered her name again. It came back without ceremony. He just walked past her in the hallway, muttered, "Hey, Summer," and kept going. No apology, no awareness that he'd been missing it at all. She didn't correct him, didn't explain how empty the last 24 hours had felt. Some things, she thought, are lighter when you carry them alone. Rick was headed out later that night. He didn't say where, and she didn't ask. But when she drifted into the garage to watch him work, he glanced up and almost as an afterthought said, "You could come along if you want." And so she found herself sitting in the passenger seat of his ship, the glass dome reflecting the faint glimmer of stars that weren't the ones she grew up with. The hum of the engine was steady, almost soothing, and the space between worlds stretched out like a quiet road with no end. They arrived in what Rick called a station city, though it didn't look like any station she'd imagined. It floated in the black like a piece of a dream that had been misplaced, half ruins, half lanterns, glowing with soft amber light. Its buildings curved upward, as if they'd been grown rather than built, and the air inside was filled with the gentle hum of hundreds of different lives overlapping without ever colliding. Rick vanished almost immediately, off to barter or steal or both, and Summer wandered alone. The streets were wide and empty in some places, narrow and crowded in others, lined with stalls selling things she couldn't name, jars of bottled laughter, stacks of fabric that rippled even without wind, tiny clocks whose hands spun in slow circles without ever pointing to a number. In the center of the city was a library, though not like Earth's. It wasn't made of books. Every wall was lined with clear cylinders, each one containing a floating image, a moment preserved in motion. A woman laughing on a balcony, a child chasing something just out of view, a man sitting in a field with his head in his hands as the light changed around him. Memories, maybe? Or dreams someone had chosen not to wake from. She felt the weight of the pocket watch in her jacket and wondered if the moments inside these cylinders felt anything, being kept like this. Were they lonely? Or were they grateful not to fade? In one corner of the library, she found a bench and sat down. The air was warm, humming faintly, as if the whole city breathed together. She closed her eyes just for a minute. When she opened them again, Rick was standing nearby, watching her with that unreadable look he wore when he thought she didn't notice. "Ready?" he said. She nodded, but her eyes lingered on the shelves one last time. A whole city of things kept from being forgotten. And somewhere inside her pocket, the watch pulsed once, like it knew this place. Rick said he needed 5 more minutes, which Summer already knew could mean an hour. She wandered back out of the library into the cooler air of the station's outer rings. Here the walls thinned, the light dimmed, and the city's hum softened until it sounded almost like the ocean from far away. She found an airlock with the inner door propped open and a man sitting cross-legged just inside. He was eating something wrapped in wax paper, the smell warm and faintly sweet. The man looked older, though not in the way people on Earth did. His hair was silver, but his eyes looked like they'd been young for a very long time. He noticed her in the doorway and lifted the sandwich halfway toward her. "Trade you half for a story," he said. Summer blinked. "I don't really have any stories." He shrugged and tore the sandwich in two anyway, holding a piece out to her. It was soft, a little crumbly, and tasted faintly of cinnamon and something she couldn't name. She sat down across from him, the floor cool under her legs, the stars beyond the open outer window slow and impossibly far away. "You do have stories," he said between bites. "Everybody does. Just most people forget them until someone else listens." She thought about the last few weeks, about drifting in and out of rooms without names, about her brother's blank look in the hallway, about the watch in her pocket, ticking against her palm like a second heartbeat. She thought about asking him what he meant. Instead, she asked, "How long have you been here?" He smiled faintly. "Long enough to know that when people leave, the city keeps their echoes." The answer didn't make sense, but it didn't feel like it was supposed to. They finished the sandwich in silence, the crumbs falling between them like dust in low gravity. When Rick finally appeared in the doorway, smelling faintly of engine oil and something sharper, the man was already gone. No sound, no movement, just the empty airlock, the lingering scent of cinnamon, and the feeling that she'd told a story without saying a word. As they walked back to the ship, she realized the watch in her pocket wasn't ticking anymore. Back in her room, Summer sat cross-legged on the floor, the pocket watch resting lightly in her palm like a sleeping thing. She had been holding on to it for days now, afraid to press it, afraid to lose the quiet rhythm it seemed to carry. She turned it over again and again, searching for a latch, a button, a seam, anything. But the watch remained smooth and whole, as if it had no intention of opening on its own terms. Then, as the evening light slipped through the curtains, something shifted. The metal beneath her fingers grew warm, pulsing softly like a heartbeat matching her own. Without quite deciding, Summer pressed her thumb against the surface. The room around her dissolved, melting like watercolors bleeding into one another. She found herself standing in a place both familiar and strange, a mirror world that reflected not who she was, but who she wasn't. She saw herself walking down the hallway of the house, but it wasn't the Summer she knew. This one was younger, smaller, laughing with a friend whose face she recognized but whose name escaped her. They shared a secret, whispered in bursts of sunlight, the kind that warmed the skin just before dusk. Then the scene shifted like turning a page. She watched herself sitting alone on a rooftop, eyes fixed on a sky full of stars, stars that hadn't yet forgotten how to shine. Another flicker, a memory she thought lost. Rick's rare smile, soft and unguarded in the kitchen light on a morning that had long since slipped away. Each vision was a thread pulled from the fabric of what might have been, or what once was, moments of connection, joy, and quiet love she had forgotten to hold on to. The watch didn't just keep memories, it showed the spaces between them, the echoes of what she missed. When she blinked, the visions faded, and she was back in her room, the weight of the watch suddenly heavier, filled not just with moments, but with all the feelings tied to them: longing, loss, hope. Summer breathed slowly, feeling the gentle ache settle deep inside, like a lullaby sung to a fading light. She tucked the watch into her pocket, as if carrying a secret between her heartbeats. Outside, the stars waited quietly, patient and true. The night stretched on, quiet and deep, as Summer found herself drawn outside once again. The stars, though still shy, flickered softly above, casting a pale glow over the world she knew and the one she was learning to see beneath it. She wandered toward a place she'd never been, just beyond the edge of town, where the ordinary folded away into something softer, quieter. There was a bridge there, made not of wood or steel, but of delicate branches woven together, suspended over a slow river that gleamed like liquid silver. As she stepped onto the bridge, the air around her thickened with stillness. Along the branches perched hundreds of birds, small and pale, their feathers ruffled like downy clouds. But they weren't awake. They stood perfectly still, eyes closed, as if the entire bridge were cradled in a gentle sleep. Summer moved slowly, careful not to disturb them. Each step was measured, like moving through a dream where sound and movement carried meaning beyond what words could hold. The birds seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the bridge itself, a shared pulse that echoed in the quiet corners of her mind. She thought about the pocket watch in her pocket, its faint warmth pressing gently against her skin. It felt like a companion in this strange place, an old friend who knew the language of silence and the weight of moments carried quietly. The river beneath the bridge whispered soft secrets, stories of places and people long gone, memories folded into the flow like petals on water. Summer closed her eyes for a moment, letting the cool night wrap around her like a blanket. When she opened them again, the stars were a little brighter. She imagined the birds might wake soon, their song rising like a lullaby for the world itself. And somewhere deep inside, she felt a slow, steady stretching, a reaching outward towards something just beyond the horizon of sleep. Sometimes, Summer thought, the hardest things to hold on to are the moments that didn't last, the ones so small and soft, they slip between fingers before you even realize they were there. She remembered one morning, not recent, but not so far gone either, when Rick laughed. Not the usual sharp, biting chuckle that echoed like a warning. Not the kind that hid pain or sarcasm. This was different. It was a quiet laugh, almost a sigh that came from somewhere deep and unexpected. She was sitting at the kitchen table, still rubbing sleep from her eyes, watching him tinker with a strange device that blinked in colors she couldn't name. The sun was just rising, casting long shadows that moved slowly like the world itself was stretching awake. Rick looked up suddenly, caught sight of her watching, and smiled that crooked smile she'd seen 1,000 times. But then he laughed. It was soft, almost like a secret shared between the morning and the light. It filled the kitchen, warm and unguarded. For a moment, the weight of everything, of the wild adventures, the endless experiments, the complicated silence between them, lifted like mist. Summer held on to that laugh. She carried it in her mind on days when the house felt too heavy or the stars were too dim. It was a reminder that beneath the layers of anger, grief, and brilliance, there was still something human, still something gentle. That laugh was like a thread she could follow back when everything else felt lost, a soft echo of a time when things were simpler, or at least quieter. And sometimes, when the world was still enough, she thought she could hear it again, just beneath the hum of the universe, waiting to be found. Coming back felt like stepping into a dream you almost remembered. Soft edges and familiar shapes, but a feeling that something just beyond your sight had changed. The house was still the same in all the ways that mattered, the faded wallpaper curling at the corners, the faint hum of the old refrigerator, and Rick's lab always just beyond the kitchen door, smelling of ozone and forgotten worlds. But Summer noticed things no one said out loud. The light in the hallway hung a little lower, casting longer shadows that stretched like sleepy fingers. The ticking of the clocks was slower, as if time itself had decided to pause and catch its breath. And the quiet, oh, the quiet felt deeper, filled with the weight of things unsaid and moments held between glances. Morty was there, of course, but he moved through the house like a ghost carrying half-remembered dreams. Sometimes their eyes met, and she saw the flicker of something, recognition or maybe regret. But the words never came. Beth was busy, always busy, but Summer caught her once by the sink, staring out the window like she was waiting for a sign the stars might come back. Jerry wandered through the rooms, bumping into things and mumbling apologies as if the house itself were a puzzle he hadn't quite solved. Summer carried the pocket watch in her jacket pocket, its pulse steady and soft, a quiet reminder that some things were still waiting to be found. She sat by the window that night, watching the sky as the darkness thickened, and she whispered to the missing stars, hoping they heard her somewhere out there. Night deepened around the house, settling over each corner like a slow sigh. The rooms, worn with years of laughter and quiet sorrow, seemed to hold their breath, as if waiting for something just beyond the edge of sound. Summer sat by the window, her fingers tracing the faint pulse of the pocket watch tucked close to her heart. The stars were still missing, leaving the sky an endless, soft, black canvas. Then from somewhere deep inside the house, a place beneath walls and floors where memories sleep, a melody began to stir. It was fragile and delicate, a lullaby carried on the breath of old nights and forgotten dreams. The tune slipped through the hallway like a whisper, weaving around the furniture and folding gently into the curtains. It was a song she had heard once, long ago, sung not by any person, but by the house itself. An echo of warmth and safety in a world that often felt too vast. Summer closed her eyes, letting the lullaby cradle her thoughts, each note a soft embrace. The music didn't ask for anything, didn't try to fill the quiet. It simply was, like the gentle beating of a heart in the dark. In that moment, she felt the house remember her, and she remembered it. Two quiet souls holding space for each other, beneath a sky still waiting to be found. The days stretched and folded in on themselves, like soft paper being carefully creased and unfolded again. Summer found herself noticing the spaces, the pauses that wove through the conversations and moments around her. Words were often rushed or clumsy, falling like loose stones in the river of everyday life. But the silence between them, the quiet breaths, the lingering looks, the gentle pauses, those carried weight. She sat with Morty one afternoon on the couch, their knees barely touching, the room filled with the soft hum of a forgotten television show playing somewhere else. He didn't say much, and she didn't either. But in the stillness there was something unspoken, a gentle understanding that didn't need to be put into words. Sometimes, she realized, love was less about what was said and more about what was simply held without explanation, without rush. The pocket watch in her jacket ticked quietly, a steady heartbeat reminding her that some moments are meant to be felt, not spoken. That evening, as the sun slipped below the horizon and the first stars shyly appeared, Summer whispered into the gathering dark, "I'm here." And somewhere, in the quiet spaces between, she felt the world answer back. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the faint glow of tiny lights dancing just beyond the trees. Summer stepped lightly through the soft grass, drawn toward the fireflies that shimmered like scattered stars fallen to earth. Each flicker was a whisper, a memory, a hope, a fragment of something once held close, but now drifting just out of reach. She moved slowly, careful not to disturb their delicate glow, feeling as if she were walking through a dream stitched together by light itself. The fireflies gathered along an unseen path, weaving through shadows and moonbeams, leading her deeper into a forest that felt less like a place and more like a feeling. With every step, the air grew warmer, the darkness softer. Somewhere ahead, the fireflies clustered around an old tree, its branches wide and strong like arms waiting to hold forgotten stories. Summer reached out and brushed her fingers against the bark, feeling the pulse of time beneath the rough surface, slow, steady, eternal. She thought about the moments held in the pocket watch tucked close to her heart. Moments waiting to be found, waiting to be remembered. And in the hush of the night, surrounded by the soft glow of those tiny lights, Summer felt something shift, a gentle unfolding, like the first breath of dawn after the longest night. In the hollow beneath the old tree, Summer found something small, tucked beneath a moss-covered stone, a folded piece of paper, its edges worn like a whispered secret. She unfolded it slowly, the delicate crackle of the paper sounding loud in the stillness around her. The words inside were simple, written in a careful hand. Sometimes the way back is not a path, but a pause. Listen for the softest echoes, they will guide you home. She read it twice, then folded the note carefully, pressing it to her chest. The message was neither a promise nor a warning, just a quiet reminder that sometimes the longest journeys are made in silence. Summer sat beneath the tree, the cool earth steady beneath her, and let the words settle like a gentle breath in her chest. The stars above were faint, but their light was patient, shining softly through the branches, holding space for the lost and the found alike. And in that moment, she understood that home was not always a place. Sometimes it was the quiet in between, the spaces where memory and hope meet. Summer was wandering through a soft haze of twilight when she noticed someone sitting alone on a worn bench, nestled beneath a tree that seemed older than time itself. The stranger's eyes were deep pools of calm, reflecting stars that didn't shine in the sky anymore. When their gaze met, Summer felt a gentle pull, as if this person held pieces of stories she thought were lost. "Do you remember the stars?" the stranger asked, voice like a lullaby half remembered. Summer nodded, though she knew the question was more than just about the sky. "They don't disappear," the stranger said softly. "They simply wait for us to remember how to see them again." They spoke without hurry, words drifting like leaves on a quiet stream. The stranger shared stories of forgotten places, of laughter tucked away in shadows, of moments that never truly vanished but slept beneath the surface of time. Summer listened, her heart folding around each tale like a fragile bird taking flight. In that stillness, she found a thread of connection, a soft light in the deepening dark. When the stranger finally stood to leave, they pressed something into Summer's hand, a small stone, smooth and warm, etched with a single word: remember. Summer watched them disappear into the twilight, the stone heavy with meaning in her palm, and the quiet echo of a promise hanging in the air. The morning light spilled gently through the curtains, warm and slow, like honey spreading over a cool morning. Summer awoke with a feeling she hadn't known in a long time, a quiet curiosity that fluttered softly in her chest. She wandered through the house, noticing things she'd long forgotten to see. The way the sunlight caught dust motes, turning them into tiny floating stars. The soft hum of the refrigerator that was almost like a heartbeat. The faint scent of rain lingering in the air from the night before. Outside, the world seemed different too. Leaves whispered in the breeze, and the sky stretched wide and inviting, a vast canvas waiting for stories to be drawn across it. Summer found herself smiling without knowing why, as if the ordinary had been washed anew with a gentle magic. She watched a child playing down the street, their laughter ringing clear and pure, a melody she hadn't realized she missed. For a moment, she remembered what it was like to see without expectation, to wonder at the smallest things and believe in the unseen. She touched the pocket watch tucked close to her heart, feeling its quiet pulse, and whispered, "Thank you." And somewhere, in the soft folds of the morning light, the world seemed to lean in just a little closer, ready to share its secrets once more. The evening wrapped the world in soft shadows, and Summer found herself drawn to the old music box resting on her dresser. A forgotten thing, its paint chipped and worn, but still humming with quiet life. She wound the key slowly, and the delicate notes began to play. A lullaby she hadn't heard in years, but one that seemed to know every part of her heart. The melody rose and fell like a gentle tide, pulling memories from the depths, moments of warmth, of being held, of whispers spoken just before sleep. She closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her, each note a soft caress against the quiet ache inside. The pocket watch pulsed gently in her pocket, as if keeping time with the song. Outside, the stars blinked awake, shy and steady, filling the night with patient light. In that hush, Summer felt the lullaby fold around her like a warm blanket, carrying her toward dreams that waited quietly beyond the horizon of sleep. Summer stepped forward, her feet barely touching the ground as the world shifted beneath her. She found herself in a vast field, not of grass or flowers, but of clouds, soft and endless, stretching far beyond the edges of sight. Each step was light as a whisper, and the clouds cradled her like a gentle ocean, rising and falling in slow rhythm. The air was cool and clean, tinged with the scent of rain yet to fall, and the sky above was a wash of twilight blues fading into stars. Around her, the clouds shimmered with quiet light, catching colors she could not name, pale golds, soft lavenders, and the faintest hints of pink. It was as if the sky itself had spilled its dreams across the earth, inviting her to wander without hurry or worry. She reached out a hand and brushed her fingers through the mist. It felt like silk and hope, cool and endlessly soft. For a moment, Summer closed her eyes and let the field carry her, weightless and free. Somewhere deep inside, the pocket watch pulsed, a steady heartbeat that kept her tethered to both this world and the ones she'd left behind. As she drifted, a lullaby hummed faintly on the wind, the same one that had wrapped around her just hours before. It was a song of belonging, of gentle rest and quiet return. And in the midst of that endless floating sea, Summer felt peace settle like a soft sigh, a place where the night held no fear, only gentle wonder. In the heart of the cloud field, where the mist shimmered with soft light, Summer saw a shape emerge, like a flicker of stars caught in the shape of a person. The figure moved with a grace that seemed part dream, part memory. Their eyes held the depth of distant galaxies, and their voice was the gentle rustle of cosmic winds. "You carry the pulse of time with you," the figure said, voice barely louder than a whisper. "The watch you hold remembers what the stars forget." Summer nodded, feeling the weight of the words settle softly inside her. "There is a secret in the silence between moments," the figure continued. "A story that does not end but folds back into itself like the light of stars looping through the dark." They reached out, and for a moment Summer thought she might dissolve into the mist. But instead she felt a warmth, a quiet strength that wrapped around her like a shield made of light. "Remember," the figure said, "that even when the night feels endless, the stars are never truly gone. They wait for you to find them again." And with that, the figure faded into the swirling clouds, leaving behind a trail of shimmering dust that danced like fireflies in the soft night. Summer stood alone in the vast field, her heart steady, her breath slow, carrying a new kind of hope, a quiet knowing that some lights never truly fade. The clouds beneath her feet began to thin, fading like morning mist pulled back by the sun's gentle hand. Summer felt the warmth of the stardust figure's words pulse softly in her chest, a steady glow that seemed to lighten the quiet spaces inside her. The sky above was vast, painted in shades of deep indigo and pale silver, as if the universe was breathing with a slow, peaceful rhythm. She took slow, deliberate steps toward the horizon, where the first hints of dawn whispered through the darkness. Around her, the world felt hushed and reverent, holding its breath as if honoring the fragile light she carried. The pocket watch in her pocket ticked steadily, a heartbeat in the stillness, reminding her that time, like hope, moves in circles, always returning. As the landscape softened into the familiar shapes of home, Summer breathed in the cool morning air, tasting the promise of new beginnings woven through the quiet. Summer sat by the window as the first light of dawn stretched across the sky, painting everything in gentle shades of gold and blue. The world outside was waking slowly, like a soft breath after a long night. She thought about all the moments she had carried, the laughter and silence, the lost stars and whispered secrets, the small kindnesses and quiet courage tucked inside her heart. They were like threads woven through a tapestry, fragile yet strong, shimmering softly in the morning light. The pocket watch rested warm and steady in her palm, no longer just a thing to be understood, but a companion, a quiet pulse that matched the rhythm of her own breathing. She whispered to the rising sun, "Thank you for holding me." And in that moment, the world seemed to pause, a soft, infinite space where time folded gently in on itself, and every ending was also a beginning. Summer smiled, knowing the quiet light she carried would never truly leave her. And with that, she stretched into the stars.